Pod SaaS, where we're putting the SaaS back in SaaSy. Sponsored by LeadrPro, where you can book demos with target customers on demand and fill your sales pipeline instantly.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Pod SaaS. I'm your host Chris Sheng, and today we have Camela Thompson from CaliberMind. Hi Camela, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me on, Chris.
Yeah, of course. Where are you coming to us from?
Seattle, Washington.
Oh, okay, great. How's the weather up there right now?
Well, we're finally edging out of what we call January here. So it's no longer 50 and raining. We actually had some 70-degree weather, which is big for us. So it looks like we're turning the corner.
Cool. Why don't you tell us a little bit what CaliberMind is, and then also, who makes a good customer for you guys?
So CaliberMind is a B2B marketing analytics solution, but what makes us different is we connect directly to all of the data sources. We clean the data, normalize it, and unify it along a timeline, and then analyze it instead of just plugging into a CRM and assuming things are okay. Our deal customer is, we found B2B between 250 to 750 employees. We found that people who are much larger than that tend to be less motivated to be highly analytics driven. And then people who are smaller than that, not really ready yet for a B2B customer data platform.
And you're the VP of marketing over there, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, cool. How long have you been with CaliberMind?
So interesting story. I started my own freelancing business, worked with them for a couple of years, and then I've been with them officially since October of 2021.
And I've seen that you also have done a lot of work with other startups, correct? In like a go-to-market and marketing capacity?
Growing up in Seattle really cut my teeth in the tech industry, and I've been there ever since. So I think I started answering phones for a tech company when I was 14. Not sure if that was legal, but they're not around anymore, so that's fine.
Okay. Got it. Cool. I'm curious as to how that journey went from answering phones in a tech environment, and then how did that evolve into what you're doing today? Before we do that, we'll get into that a series of just like rapid fire questions. It allows us to get to know you, and we'll organically kind of get an understanding of how you ended up at Caliber, and also just your personal professional journey.
Sure.
All right. Awesome. They're all pretty easy. The first question is your favorite entrepreneur and or startup story.
Okay, so this is going to be, bear with me, Daryl Evans has the podcast Mind Shift. He was a guest on my podcast, The Revenue Marketing Report, and he totally challenged my thinking in several areas, and it was great. So first of all, challenged the whole idea of the demo being the call to action everywhere, and then also being more transparent about B2B pricing.
And when you say I'm a marketing geek too. So when you say the call to action of demo being everywhere, what do you mean by that?
So he basically asserted that the starting off with proposing a demo is very backwards, and that a lot of people are landing on your webpage much, much earlier than that, and they're looking for something of value. So if they're coming in through SEO, it's because they've found a good piece of content perhaps, and they want to learn a little bit more along those lines, maybe best practices. So just hitting them over the head with the demo, not a great entry point. And I think that's super smart.
Yep. Agreed. Cool. As a kid, maybe before you're 14 answering phones, but do you remember at 8, 9, 10 what you wanted to be?
I wanted to be a veterinarian.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
and then I found out they don't just fix animals. Sometimes they put them down too. And I was like, I'm out, unsubscribe.
Got it. Cool. Next question is centered around most painful experience. This could be personal or professional. And to just kind of put it into context, I feel like the most exponential growth that people tend to go through in their lives stem from being in extreme positions of discomfort. And so that's kind of the context for the question. But is there anything that you can recollect that, maybe you kind of reflect on day to day or every now and then that, again, may have been a super hard experience to go through, but learning from it and looking at it now, it was a pivotal moment in your life?
My journey in tech, I was in revenue operations spanning marketing, sales, and customer success for a good 15 years. And I didn't burn out epically once, it was actually twice. And just had to take a lot of time off, sit and realize, something about this just isn't working for me. Is it the lack of autonomy? Is it the lack of resources? Is it the arguing over data points I don't think are important? And what it all boiled down to was that the environments that I was choosing to work in weren't in alignment with my values. And it didn't matter what position I had if I wasn't working towards a goal that was meaningful for me. So I ended up stepping away from that career completely because I feel like if I were to go into the same job, I would repeat a lot of the same behaviors. Totally changed my career path. Ended up being a copywriter and doing a ton of freelancing work. And then that put me on the trajectory for where I am now.
Is there anything that particularly motivates you in like the 25th hour, right? So for example, if you're taking that example, getting back into the space, right? Like after taking a hiatus or a break or sabbatical, however you want to call it nowadays, but making then the decision, maybe a hard decision to kind of like go back into that space. Is there anything particularly that helps motivate you or pushes you past some of those hurdles or obstacles?
Yeah, I found that what brings me absolute joy is mentorship. And if I can find a way to connect to people and help elevate them, that sustains me.
Anything that you do in particular that helps you to decompress? Obviously, like as a freelancer, I feel like there's a lot of stresses that goes, you're an entrepreneur in your own right? As a freelancer, consultant, contractor in a certain degree, right? So you don't have a lot of the secure job security that you might have, it's arguable nowadays, but you don't have as much job security, but you also have a lot more ownership. But still, it's a lot of stress, right? Especially because the onus falls on you in almost every single capacity. So anything that you do that helps you kind of like get back into center?
I have a regular meditation practice. I do yoga. And then anytime I can disconnect and get in nature and just find one little thing I can be in awe of, it helps me find a lot of balance.
Any skill that you've picked up along the way as a freelancer or in your roles that you've loved or hated?
I'll pick one I love, okay. And that is prioritization. You have to become very skilled at that as a freelancer and understanding exactly how long things will take and setting proper expectations. And that has set me up so much better for the rest of my career and to be able to keep my work hours condensed. So if you want to work a 40-hour work week, maybe a little long, a little higher than 40 hours, it's really all about prioritization, figuring out what the most critical things are, and then what can actually slide. If you can't do that, you can't have sustainable work hours.
Next question, as kind of before we went live on here, we were talking about one of the episodes I was did the 2 ultra marathons, and I have a pretty clear understanding of things that I'm trying to shoot from my bucket list that are somewhat ambitious. But is there anything that's on yours that you find kind of maybe unique to you, unique to your own goals and your aspirations?
Yes. So we have a little tiny 19-foot RV.
Okay.
And I've got a map behind me, and we're marking off each state we stay in. And to me, it was really important to be with a company that embraced the very remote lifestyle and gave me the opportunity to continue traveling. So yeah.
Is the goal to hit the entire continental US?
Yeah. I mean, my big goal really is to also expand into Canada, and we're trying to figure out the logistics in terms of internet and coverage and all that good stuff. But yeah, North America.
Last question here before we kind of just jump into more of your journey, but it's the idea of legacy. What kind of impact do you want to leave on this earth before you leave it?
I want to be remembered for kindness. Like if nothing else, just I motivated someone else. I was kind to them. That's what I hope for. All
right. That wraps up just the rapid fire questions. Pretty painless. You mentioned a lot of different things in there that I feel like are good nuggets for us to kind of extrapolate on. So that said, walk us through what it was, you mentioned answering phones in tech and at 14, like, did you know that you wanted to be involved in tech at such a young age? A lot of the times when we've had guests that are, really involved in tech, they started, learning to code at a very young age. And that was like something that led them into obviously startup life and the idea of building. But where does that inspiration or where did that motivation come from you essentially young age? And then, walk us through a little bit, towards the early part of your career, as to how you continue to indulge that.
I don't think that I came out of the gate thinking tech was it. However, I ended up going to college, really struggling to choose a major. And I'm an artist. I've published fiction novels. There's this huge creative side. And then I also really love statistics, analytics, data. So as I came out of college, I'm like, what am I going to do? I started in these really general positions, moved towards analyst, but I still kept that creative piece going throughout. So if I was in marketing operations, I was also writing email copy and a lot of other things. And what drove me there was an interest in psychology and how people tick and what they really care about and uncovering those pain points. So I think what kept me motivated was realizing not that I wanted specifically to go into tech, but that tech solves problems for people, and uncovering what pain they feel and what problems are solved is really the key to making this whole thing work. Like it motivates people to even consider your product in the first place, and it's what keeps the product sticky. So I think that's what really hooked me and kept me going.
Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a different course here than we normally do, because traditionally what we'll have is like a founder going through like how they start the building and all that kind of stuff. But given that you do have a strong marketing background, just kind of like go to market background, love to kind of get your more like holistic and philosophical thoughts around marketing, because some of the things that you're talking about now, I feel like is a lot in alignment with the values of what this podcast is about. And also I think for me personally, as a growth marketer, I think the idea that we always lead with on our agency side is like lead with empathy from everything that we do, right? So starting to really understand from the recipient or the ICP, like understanding their pain points in a way that they would describe it, right? So how do you do that? How do you immerse yourself within their communities, and actually listen, majority of the times to what their plight is, what are their priorities day in, day out, and ideally, obviously that aligns with the pain point that either the company that you're working with or the client, is solving for. But in some cases it's not. Sometimes there's poor product market fit, and in some cases there's really strong market fit. And so it's like, we try to help founders navigate that path. But what are some kind of like maybe you have like some go-to sayings or go-to best practices, when a company has come to you in the past around when as a freelancer trying to help with their go-to-market motions. Walk us through some of your underlying philosophies.
A lot of this stems from being a technical buyer for a long time and being treated in an interesting way as a woman who was technical. I can't tell you how many times I had a male seller ask for the technical guy. And just like the treatment I received along the way and the way they pitched the product and how out of alignment it was with what was motivated me to frequently speak to customers, listen to recordings. Those demo calls, those intro calls are even better because you can hear exactly how people are talking about things. And a lot of times without being prompted, they'll tell you why they sought you out in the first place. And a lot of times that language, like continue the research with your digital marketing team, have them look up all the SEO terms. But a lot of times if you take that language, you then see people actually typing that information in, and that's what gets you found. So I think the biggest frustration I had as an operations professional was trying to sell the leadership team on using data to understand the total addressable market, who was actually interacting with their product and who was interacting with it when. And then also convincing marketing leadership that focusing on product features, that's not what motivates people. I mean, they want to know these things later on as they're solving their problem to make sure it's a comprehensive solution. But I'm not going to buy a marketing analytics platform because I want multi-touch attribution. I'm going to buy it because the business is questioning marketing's effectiveness. And I need to be able to point to something and show something tangible that's believable that the rest of the organization can buy into. And that stems from job security, a need for that, and a need to negate some of the fear I'm feeling as a person in a marketing leadership position that's facing potentially a very short tenure based on all the data we have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I'm always interested on what we can unpack. And I follow nonviolent communication really closely. Marshall Rosenberg, he's so fabulous. But basically, it's all about peeling things back until you actually hear the feelings and the needs they're attached to.
What are some actionable ways to peel away to get to the feelings that you've discovered?
I mean, just sitting and talking to people, having in-person events with low volume, having a beer with somebody who has had your product. I mean, it doesn't have to be alcohol, although that does tend to like lighten up the vulnerability levels a little bit, but really getting to know them as a person, what motivates them, what their career path, exactly what you're doing right here. Getting to know them as a human really will help uncover what led them to you and why they're motivated to continue that relationship.
And I feel like obviously on the consumer front, that is a very important part of consumer good companies and how they sell to their customers, right? Like finding the feeling, finding, getting away and peeling away to the root feeling that is going to encourage or impact a purchase decision based on that a specific demographic, right? Why do you feel like there's been such a large, and I have my own feelings on this, but such a large disconnect in the technical space, software space, when it comes to marketing and sales? Because it's still like always impacting humans, right? Like, but there's been up until I think, maybe the past year or even 2 years, like since the pandemic. Before that, it was pretty hard to find, a lot of that human narrative interwoven into the storytelling component of these SaaS companies. So why do you think that is? Do you think it's, the types of founders, or do you think it's, just the space and maybe like the way that it, the playbooks were done before, decades before? I don't know.
I mean, there's no silver bullet, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think there's several factors going on. Like, first of all, the goals you give each department are really a strong correlation of how aligned those departments will be. So personally, I have a pipeline and revenue goal as a marketer. So does my sales guy. So it is in my interest to figure out what is driving pipeline and not just focusing on a volume-driven metric like MQLs or leads. When we see people, and I've seen this over and over, when you give somebody a really steep volume metric without thinking about conversion rates and efficiency, you are begging for the wrong behavior to start taking place. You see organizations, so marketing and sales, they agree on what a marketing qualified lead is. The benchmark goes up, they want more of them. So we change that definition a little bit, and all of a sudden we get flooded with content syndication and sales gets really upset. Marketing tends to focus, when there's a volume goal like that, on how many are being followed up on, as opposed to that quality conversion rate. And they're also ignoring, so I hear this in so many organizations, marketing's angry because they gave you all these great leads and nobody's following up on them. And then sales is saying these leads are terrible and they lead to nothing. And both of them are right. How can we work together better to improve the quality and improve those conversion rates and scale faster? It's probably going to be a combination of enablement. It's going to be learning what to gate and what to pass through. And then it's going to be aligning on messaging and getting all of that valuable feedback from the people who are actually talking to people. Mm-hmm. And I see so many marketers using data and research to determine their marketing plan, or they're listening to the product marketer or product. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're ignoring what sales is telling you and they're interfacing directly with the customer, it's a huge miss.
What is the handoff for you between marketing and sales functions? Like, how is that defined in your guys' organization? And is that something that, one, what is the definition of the handoff? And then two, following up to that would be, how do you get that feedback loop, or how do you build process around that feedback loop, post demo, post sales conversation, from the sales side, to get that to help recalibrate almost like the top of funnel efforts from the marketing side?
So in terms of systems handoff, we're a very small organization. Our awareness isn't where I'd like it to be yet. We're working on it, but we're not there yet. So we haven't put all of these gates in place to slow down the lead volume going to sales. So a content download and a demo request are both going to go over. Now, I know they're going to be treated differently. Ultimately, I'm paid on pipeline and revenue goal. So I'm more focused on how things are being received and converted than this MQL number. It's kind of average. It's a good leading indicator, and I do watch it, but it's a very different mindset than I've had in the past. Now, when it comes to gathering feedback, I have hired a contractor. She's fabulous. Ellen Naylor has done a phenomenal job for us on win and lost opportunity interviews. So we have the salesperson do a warm intro for her. She gets on the phone, and then we do that in exchange, for their time. We donate to a charity of their choice or something along those lines. And those write-ups have been amazingly affirming in some cases and discouraging in others, but we take the feedback and we incorporate it into the process as we can. We have other indicators along the way that are more scalable, but I think for now, as we're figuring things out, digging in really deeply on a sale that has taken a long time and gone one way or the other is more valuable to us than just like a thumbs up or thumbs down on an opportunity or something. I don't know.
What's maybe been some of those like surprising learnings that have come out, either positive or negative, that you feel like has had a strong impact on how you guys either qualify leads or acquire leads?
So we have one salesperson in particular who's just the nicest person. And his empathy, just repeatedly, we hear how positive that experience was. And even if they don't buy, they end up recommending us to other folks because he just has such a good personal touch. So we've been able to identify that. We've shared recordings with the rest of the team so that they can learn from it and see what behaviors are useful and which are harmful. I think the big negative that we're working on correcting right now is that this is a tool that is an analyst's dream, but not all marketers are analysts. So it's really important for us to continue to develop the UI and come up with executive dashboards that are kind of organized by functional group in a way that are highly consumable. So if somebody doesn't have that resource to translate everything for them, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, but when you can connect to everything and do all the data, analysts love that. We just need to figure out how to boil it down a little bit more.
Marketing as a function has evolved quite dramatically in like the past 5-6 years, right? And I think, when I was in college, and you're talking about like 20 some years ago, but like when I was started off my career, right? The idea behind marketing was awareness, media buying and generating as much awareness as possible. It wasn't as data driven as it is now. And it's almost like a prerequisite for a marketer nowadays to understand how to measure KPIs and different kind of conversion metrics, as a part of the overlying success of what their role and function is. And that's kind of like how they're measured on success, right? So, I think that's obviously continuing to evolve. And have you seen that, or have you experienced that in your experiences? And what has kind of been like some of the evolution of the role as you've seen it, and the skill set that you've built now and you have today versus maybe where it was like 10 years ago?
That's a great question. So just what I've seen is as we moved more digital, the executive impression was that everything should be measurable and fine-tuned. And I think a lot of us in marketing realize that a lot of those digital interactions are anonymous or non-trackable. So there's this huge misalignment between what executive teams, how they think this works. So for example, I've seen a lot of executives just want to look at the source and gauge that as the truth. And I'm like, well, we can't read minds, so word of mouth is out. And you're negating the hundreds of touches that the entire organization has had to do to get the deal over the line. So there's got to be some kind of middle ground. Well, attribution came along, oversold itself as the silver bullet. And a lot of people I've seen this adjustment from we measure everything and it's completely accurate to gut's fine. And I'm seeing this today where people are like, I use my gut, it's fine. We should all be doing this because the data lies. And I'm like, hold on. Like all things out there, the truth is somewhere in the middle. There's this war right now between art and science, and you can't be a marketer without both. Yeah. And you can be a marketing leader and specialize in branding, advertising, but you need to have somebody on your team who can read the tea leaves, as it were, and figure out what's working, what's efficient, what's inefficient. You need a blend of both. So I just feel really lucky to have the technology we do, because we look at everything from web signals to sales interactions to product signals. And by looking at all of these things holistically, I can estimate, and I don't oversell that as no, but I can estimate what's working and what isn't and adjust accordingly. And let me tell you, as a marketing leader, the ability to do that and communicate realistically to the board, you become unstoppable.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times when people are saying like go on gut or being more subjective, right? I think like that's the difference nowadays, is that we don't have to argue about it. We can let the data dictate, right? And it's not to say that there's no better ideas out there than what we're testing right now, but let's figure out what that baseline is that's the most optimal from what we've historically seen. And then let's continue to then use that as the benchmark and throw in new additional experiments, right? And you just continually refine, get better results, right, over time, is the idea. And then the things that you do learn is scalable into other channels as well, right? So to me, it's like, you try to drill down to maybe 2, 3, 4 variables that really like drive optimization. And then you're just constantly testing each of those variables in a controlled environment, right, as much as possible.
100%. So for example, we still look at the funnel. It serves a purpose. It's really useful in terms of measuring handoffs and efficiency. So I can identify if there's a problem between what marketing's doing and what sales doing, and if there's misalignment in definitions, and if we have to readjust something. And then overline pipeline and revenue. My functional teams, they know what metrics and systems they need to be in and looking at in more detail, but ultimately I care about maybe 4 things, and that's what I watch really closely. And then I trust the rest of my team to be able to dig in and figure out the rest. But solely going on gut, I think, is a big miss, and you're at a competitive disadvantage if you're not using the data that is available to you. You don't have to have everything strung together quite as efficiently as maybe my team is fortunate enough to have, but you do need to learn how to use what you have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 2 other things I want to touch up on here that you're talking about. Well, number 1 is going to be around the idea of, that sales hire that you guys have that is largely empathetic and continues to get, even if he's not closing, like that they're getting the referrals and recommendations based off of just how he is as a person. I think when you look at, historically what a sales persona was, it was a very type A personality, and, is maybe had a little bit more of a negative stigmatism, 10 years ago, but it's evolved, right? And I think nowadays there is a balance between like being assertive and aggressive enough to get something across the line and creating, I think, like a certain set of aligned expectations. But at the same time, right, it's like having enough empathy to know where that line is, right? Like where it's like you're not overly bombarding somebody, but you're hitting them with just right enough amount of touches to like have them feel, psychologically at least, that that it's not that that you're not desperate to close the deal, but two, it's like there's a real value here, and almost like putting the onus on the buyer or the prospect to like be almost like leading the sales process, right? And I think it's an art to kind of get to that place. But have you seen a trend or a shift? And if so, more towards like the empathy in sales. And if so, like how have you guys as an organization, I guess like handled that trend or that shift? And is that something that you guys look for as part of a hiring process? Are there specific questions that you ask about personality wise that helps you gain insight around the individual in that sense?
What I've observed is highly variable from organization to organization, and it has a lot to do with company culture. I think people can be both type A and empathetic. So, for example, this particular rep, he's really good at connecting, asking questions, active listening, and engaging. So he's present. So we look for this mindfulness and when we hire, and that same degree of engagement. So are you listening to the conversation? Are you paying attention to the details? Those things are important. But this person also has the skill of ensuring that the next step is locked down when they end the call. I have my calendar open. What time works for you? And it's done in an artful way, but it's done. So I think a lot of it has to do with how mindful we've been in our hiring process and the type of personality we look for. And I don't see that across all companies, but I have seen a lot of the startups that I'm connected with are starting to make that shift because they realize that kind of bullheaded, just knocking everything over to get the thing done, it just doesn't go over well right now. I think a lot of people are very sensitive and burned out because of the environment we're in, and it takes a softer touch.
I've seen $500 million valuation companies have the same problem, right? Which is lack of brand equity, lack of brand awareness, lack of brand trust. And to me, a lot of times the marketing function its sole purpose is to bridge that gap of trust with the target ICP enough, because it's not necessarily just like convincing somebody about how great a product or solution is. It's convincing somebody about why they should invest 15, 30 minutes of their time when time is so valuable now, right? So it's not even about, and I use this analogy a lot, but I could legitimately have a cure for cancer in my refrigerator if I was like a mad scientist and I just spent the last decade doing it. But if I'm not like a renowned medical professional in the cancer field, right, and I'm not, and I haven't been doing cancer research, through medical documentation and different boards and such, for the past 20 years. My problem when I go to market isn't that I don't have a great product, right? It's going to be, why is anybody going to trust me to take it? And I just feel like that's kind of like inherently the problem that a lot of marketers deal with. How do you look to solve that gap of trust? I have my own thinkings on it, but I'm curious as to what yours are.
So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. So I think nothing replaces customer evidence. So hearing from the words of the customer, what delights them, what motivates them, what drew them to us, I think there's no replacement for that. We can put as many stats as we want on our website, but if they're not coming from the mouths of the customer, it doesn't really matter. The other piece of that is partnering in our content strategy with influencers in our space who are trusted in the market and being completely honest and transparent with them to build that trust with them. So I guess it all comes back to empathy in a way, but I would be really interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it comes in a few different ways for us. Like a lot of times when it's like there's this underlying gap, right? I think there's two ways that we'll do it. Sometimes we do that incentive-driven approach. So it's like, hey, we want to be sensitive to your time, so let's compensate you accordingly for your time. So there's that underlying philosophy that if everybody agrees with the hypothesis that time is money, then you should be compensated even when you're being marketed to a certain degree. But and I think that's a really easy way to kind of like get like your first early conversations in, especially if you're kind of like pre-revenue or you're still trying to figure out market fit. You just want to get as many at bats with what is a good ICP hypothetically. and then be able to cross things out or validate others, fairly quickly. But I think it's also the way that we structure some of those calls, because we look at growth in stages. And so I think like understanding that if you, let's just say, did some of these incentive type of demos for product feedback, you do it for a period of 1 to 2 months, right? And you're wanting to ask the questions that's going to help you from an ROI driven standpoint. And so to me, it's going to be what we call kind of like identifying the wound. And so how do we help them identify the wound in a series of leading questions in a discovery call or in a product demo, but usually it's in discovery call phase. But how do we pose that wound in a way that we keep poking at it. So by the time at the very end of the conversation, we say, hey, by the way, here's the Band-Aid. They're willing to pay for that Band-Aid, because they've seen how bad the wound is, right? And I think like being able to measure also like how big of a wound is it? It's almost like how do you measure the pain threshold? And to us, we actually do a scale, right? So it's like 1 to 5, how big of a pain is it that our client is solving for? And if it's a 4 or 5, great, people will pay for it. But if the overwhelming percentile is going to be like a 1 or 2, then in a lot of cases, there's poorer product market fit than possibly what they initially thought of. They're going to have maybe like the current pricing model is going to be something that's going to be a bigger barrier, going to impact your conversion percentages. So, I mean, to us, again, I think to overcome those hurdles, it's doing that kind of stuff. The other stuff that we do is also, we spend a lot of time in where our client's target ICP lives, sleeps, eat, breathes, either online or offline. And I'll give a few examples of that because I don't think enough people do it. But there's Facebook groups, there's LinkedIn groups, there's associations, trade shows, Slack. Exactly. So there's a ton of these communities where you can just go in, listen, and the technical, I think, like strategy of it is called astroturfing, which is like spending time engaging with these types of communities, right? And just building trust, not asking for anything, but just building trust, becoming an authority within these communities by just sharing value. And I think by doing some of those things, and an example of that is like, we had a company that we were working with that was selling into pediatricians' offices. And this was like at the height of the pandemic. And we spent a lot of time in Facebook groups, like active Facebook groups where pediatricians were like going to each other for best practice. And what we quickly realized is that a lot of these pediatricians were now working 2 times the amount of hours, getting paid the exact same. And that's because their normal visits, that used to be 15 minutes, now 30 minutes, because everybody's asking a bunch of questions. So now if you understand that that's their day-to-day and that's how they're prioritizing things, they probably don't want to listen to a sales pitch. But if you position it in a way where, look, we know that this is the position that you're in, and here's a gift card for Starbucks to caffeinate you for your next workday. By the way, if you're interested in learning how you can continue to charge the same thing to insurance around vision screening for children, but doing it at a fraction of the time to help you save some more time so you can, eliminate some of that bandwidth from your current capacity, then let's talk. And doing it in a very subtle way. And we did that, and we ended up like hitting a record number of MQLs during the height of the pandemic for our client, and just doing something like that, right? But it never occurred to them, nor has it occurred to, I think, a lot of like the clients that we've worked with, or just SaaS companies in general, to do those types of things. And especially if your target ICP is in the SMB or mid-market space, there's a ton of available communities.
Oh, when yeah. We're active in several. And I think this also touches on the trend that B2B influencers are starting to become a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're active in those communities as well. You see them all over LinkedIn. A lot of them use a lot of great humor, but being able to connect to them as well and add value. So can you solve a kind of adjacent problem that's not as big and give value initially that'll lead to another conversation? Even better.
It's more anecdotal, and it's not like there's not a lot of ways to necessarily like measure all of those efforts yet, right? Where you're like building these relationships with other people within the community that community trusts, right? To help bridge that gap.
Like if you're working with your sales team, you can set up a referral campaign.
Yep.
And you can record it that way, or you can put a field on your opportunity object. There's a lot of ways to do it. I agree. It's hard to track. It's not impossible, and we should not try, because you're still going to get questions from the board on why you're spending so much time in a community.
Oh no, absolutely, right. So I think like, yeah, I think that's kind of, we also always will, you know, make sure that we had fields in whatever CRM to customize or curate for whatever creative avenues or channels that we're leveraging, right? I think that's super important. It's not, I guess my point is like it's almost like not baked into current tools, right? And that's the thing where I'm waiting on the next set of like marketing and analytic tools that's going to help us with that.
Yeah, it could get challenging because a lot of companies are moving towards privacy first. So I think there's always going to be an element of gut.
Yeah.
But more importantly, setting expectations with your executive team, what is and isn't trackable, and being able to tell an intelligent story around that. That's the key to survival in marketing.
Awesome. On that note, I think that's pretty much all that I have right now. I mean, unless there's anything else that you wanted to add in terms of like thoughts, any insights around the world of marketing or Caliber in general?
I just want to thank you for having me here and encourage people to check out Nonviolent Communication. It's great. It's transformational.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think a lot of the things that you shared, is a little bit different than our normal episodes, but I think it still provides a tremendous amount of value for a lot of SaaS founders that, you know, tend to listen to these shows that are like early stages, that are trying to build out their own go-to-market, build out their own sales processes before they get to their first like marketing or sales hire. Lots of great nuggets in here, and thank you so much for sharing and being a part of this.